Hi, I'm Sarah Sedwick, and this is my online student group lesson for November 2016. Today we're talking about painting Christmas ornaments, and I'm just about to start my demo. And I was talking about setup and how there's all kinds of challenges with still life setup, and they tend to get magnified when we're talking about Christmas ornaments. For one thing, I like to paint round, Christmas balls, and they roll all over the table. And for another thing, as hard as it is to place a few apples in a way that's going to feel like it's a pleasing composition, it feels like these problems get magnified with the Christmas ornaments. And sometimes I get frustrated and I just say, all right, I'm just gonna do this, and however it shakes out, and I throw them all out on the table and let it be random. But oops, this is what I have going on right now. It's just a low table set up next to my easel, and I put a spotlight on it and threw out some ornaments. Color mixing for me starts in the still life setup phase. The objects that I choose to use together in a still life, that's like the first phase of my thinking about color for my painting. And with Christmas ornaments, it's really fun. There are all kinds of color schemes that you can use on a tree, or your home decorating scheme for the holidays. You've probably all made those decisions in the past. And so for each Christmas ornament painting, I kind of think to myself, well, is this going to be a traditional red, green, and gold? Is it going to be jewel tones? Is it going to be monochromatic? I've done blue and silver ornament paintings. I just did one that was all purple and green last month. So sometimes I choose them based on the objects that I have with them. Like I painted one with some red pomegranates last month, and I chose red and gold ornaments to go with the pomegranates. For this one, where it's just ornaments, I like the kind of analogous color scheme of purple, kind of violet, red, violet, and then a pinky red, violet, and the golds, brownish gold and yellowish gold. My ornament collection I've kind of built up over time from the thrift store. And they are kind of just laid out in a pretty random pattern. And right now they're looking, I could just sit here and move them around forever. But I don't know. At some point you have to start, right? So let's talk palette. Palette. All right. This is going to look a little bit confusing because I have some leftover paint that I threw on here, but the outer ring or the outer rectangle, except for up here, are the tube colors. So I've got real dirty titanium white, cadmium yellow, Hansa yellow, cad red light, regular cad red, alizarin crimson. This is quinacridone violet that I just put out, dioxazine purple. These are some neutrals left over from the last time I painted. So I have a more lavender version of a neutral, and basically that's just me cleaning my palette up and mixing everything into a mud pile. But I have one that's a little more purple and one that's a little more yellow. Two grays. This is I think it's phthalo turquoise. It might just be a tube called turquoise, but there's phthalo pigment in it. Pretty sure phthalo turquoise. Cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, ivory black, which I probably won't use. And these are leftover mixtures as well. Just an orangey, fleshy tone thing. This is probably a mixture of the different reds and another mixture of the different reds. And then here's a mixture that approximates yellow ochre. So I put it near where I would put yellow ochre, but it's just mixed up stuff from the last time I painted. I store my palettes in the freezer so I can keep paint for a couple of weeks. and I tend to move it around and reuse it. As long as it doesn't get little chunks in it, it's totally fine. Okay. So I'm going to start out with this with an underpainting just the way I always do with still life. With portrait, it's a little bit different. I don't usually put a tone on the canvas when I do portrait, but I still do an underpainting sketch in a warm, neutral orange. And you can do a wet tone in any color you want, as long as there's no white in it. You don't want any white in your wet tone. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I need to hear it as much as you do. White is too opaque and it doesn't tend to sink into the canvas quite as well. So I've mixed up kind of a neutral orange, pretty much the CADs, CAD red, CAD yellow, and a little ultramarine there. And with Gamsol, holler at me, someone, if you're having trouble seeing or hearing anything. And I have ornaments of slightly different sizes here, and I like that too. I like having a bunch of different sizes to play with. I don't know if I've ever really tried to paint much more complicated ornaments. I know there are, you know, all the patterns and craziness. I used to have some ornaments that were like disco balls. That was cool. Never painted them though. All right, so I try to stick pretty close to the actual placement and arrangement, but I will shift things a little bit. Just slight editing of position. But I can just move things in my still life if I decide something needs to be moved. So I try not to do too much editing and where I'm just having to make stuff up or fudge relationships. I like to be able to rely on negative space to help me draw. And if I'm doing a lot of changing, saying things like, oh, it doesn't matter if I move that ornament, I can just leave it where it is in the still life and move it in my painting, no one will know. And that's true, no one will know, but then you'll lose the ability to use that negative shape in between things to help you draw. Landmarks. If we edit our landscape too much, we lose all our landmarks. I don't want to get too into the details inside the individual ornaments until I have a composition that I like. Okay, so this is all well and good up here. Now I have one little guy right here. I don't know if that's going to be enough action. Maybe. The cool thing is if you end up with a composition that's too sparse, you can always add more. I've been doing some paintings with cranberries lately, and they're so awesome. Cranberries are like the most flexible still life subject ever, because if there's ever anything that's slightly bothering you about your composition, you just throw a couple more in there. It's like, oh, fixed. Fabulous. All right. Well, so I have some dead space here. And I can choose now to, I can do a couple of things. I can take this guy and move him over Or what if I just turn him like that? I love having the screen here. It's like an automatic mirror. You can check my composition. It's kind of hard to see what I just did there. Turn this guy. Now he's facing in. And all this space is still dead. I have a, I don't like it. So while I'm doing my underpainting, when the drawing gets a little confusing, I will add something a little bit darker to my mix and come back in and firm it up a little bit. I just added some alizarin crimson to that orange that I mixed. Try to pay attention to the direction that the balls are all facing, how they're interacting with each other. They get little personalities. This one's facing down this way. No, don't everybody roll. Okay. I think the answer is going to be I have a purple one that's also kind of lurking, and I think I'm going to have him just coming in like the bottom corner. Another purple one. And we'll see how that goes. So values. Now that I've got placement laid out, I can start thinking about values. Because as we talked about in the notan, with the notan concept, it's not so much the design, the line work and layout of your painting that's going to really determine the design as much as it's going to be the value structure. Because before I started filling this in, I had a bunch of lines and maybe that looked interesting. But what you don't see is that the darkest dark in the painting is here. There's a purple ornament. This one is very dark. And then this also is very dark. And so I haven't done a thumbnail sketch. You can work out these value pattern issues in a thumbnail sketch. You can do it in a black and white value study, a notan or a 3-value study. For a larger, more ambitious painting, I would definitely do that. A little black and white painting before starting. Sketch in a sketchbook. You want to show yourself where your darkest darks and your lightest lights are. And I'm also firming up my drawing at this point. kind of block it in once and then come back in and draw it for real. And always squinting. Cast shadow shapes, very important. So I also went down another level of darkness. I added some dioxazine purple to that orange. That's how I'm getting those darker stuff, darker things. This underpainting phase is the only phase of painting where I use the white of the canvas to modulate value. Oh, this pink ornament has the whole landscape reflected in here, and me. There's me. Hi. I love it. I just love it. They're like little Dali landscapes, Salvador Dali landscapes inside the ornament. That's pretty much an underpainting for me. If this wasn't a demo, I'd maybe get more into the values. Putting in darks, pulling out lights. But I'm pretty happy with placement. And stuff. And what's so cool about this is there's going to be a little bitty me in every one of these right about here. And it changes, the little landscape inside these changes a lot with moving the light source. And so, yeah, it's a little bit formulaic the way I do these. It is. Over time, anything you do a lot is going to get formulaic, but you can change it and keep it interesting for yourself in small ways. So just by moving the light source, I've really changed what the inside of the ornaments looks like to me. As those of you who've been doing your black and white assignments know, will figure out, there's huge benefit to doing something over and over again when you're learning. I don't know how many of you play instruments. I definitely don't, but there's a lot of repetition involved in that kind of practicing. But I don't know, Christmas ornaments, I kind of just always thought it was fun from the very beginning, and it never seemed very hard to me. But everybody, different things are difficult for different people. And I'm really always very interested in hearing what they are. I think most of us have those things that we just struggle with and doesn't make sense to other people, whether it's in art or in life.
Especially in music.
Yeah.
Some people seem to be really good at music.
Have that ear. I, for example, cannot paint tomatoes. I've never been able to really paint tomatoes. I've, in my opinion, succeeded like once. It's just really hard for me. It's something about the color and the texture coming together. I have a lot of trouble making it work. If I can pull lights back out with just a brush and Gamsol, and I'm sort of just, it helps to paint lights over a lighter area. Like it will help my brights feel more brilliant if I'm painting them over a lighter part of the underpainting. That's the whole idea behind a tonal underpainting, is that it makes your darks richer and your lights feel more brilliant without, and you can use thinner paint layers. It's kind of would be part of a glazing technique. But I don't do a glazing technique. I just use it for alla prima. But also it's kind of note-taking for myself. Like, oh, don't forget the highlight. Don't forget the highlight. It's there. Okay, so that's a good underpainting. And so once I get myself to this point, I go to the palette and I do a little bit of mixing. Give my underpainting 10 or 20 minutes to sink in to the canvas. But for this, I don't know, what do I need to mix? I want to mix up something for my negative space, my background. And it's a very neutral, it's like kind of whitish. And the actual paper is kind of sort of a lavendery off purple. But if it's a gray, I need to decide what kind of gray it is. I'm taking a picture here. So I want to mix up something for the general feel of that background. I already tell I don't have enough white out here. And when you can't tell what kind of gray something is, you just need to make a decision and go with it. So I could say to myself, well, I have a lot of purples in this painting, these purple ornaments. Maybe I want to make my negative space a little bit of a yellowish gray. Maybe. I can make, and it's not that I'm then inventing that. I can sort of see it because the gray is so ambiguous, and it does feel like it gets warmer as it comes toward the light source and gets cooler as it leaves, as it retreats from the light source, and the light's coming from this way. So my negative space is going to be slightly more lavender, probably on this side, and a little more pinky or yellowy closer to the light source. So I'm going to do that. And how lucky for myself that I have these yucky leftover mud piles from my last painting session. I can just pull a little bit of that out, add a bunch of white to it, and that'll probably be a good starting point for some of that negative space. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm closing one eye. My right eye is feeling dominant today, so I'm closing my left eye and I'm mixing, and I get some paint on the palette knife and I hold it up to the still life. It's not a perfect way to judge whether I've got the color right or not, because the light on my palette knife is different than the light on the still life, but it helps me know when I'm close, and it also helps me really judge if I'm close value-wise. It's not just color that I'm looking at, it's did I get this right for the value. And so to ask myself, what is the difference between those reds? It's very subtle. And then the purple ornaments are super easy because dioxazine purple is basically that color. So a little dioxazine purple and white will do that very nicely. Is that dioxazine purple? Better be. Yeah. All right, never mind. I'm just going to keep going. And I've talked before about how I love to make gold using yellow ochre and ultramarine blue as a kind of starting point. Yellow ochre and ultramarine blue make a gorgeous olive green. And I did add some actual yellow ochre to my palette, which I didn't show you guys at the beginning. There it is. Yellow ochre and ultramarine blue make this gorgeous army green. And I use that as a kind of a basis for my gold ornaments. The gold ornaments in the dark part up here on the top look very green to me. And then all right. Pretty much I'm ready to go. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Okay, so here's my dioxazine purple, and I added a little bit of white to it, and that's going to pretty much do me for the purple ornament. And then these right here are 3 pinks for the lighter pink ornament. These 2 are pinks for the darker pink ornament. These are my golds. Got the brownie golds and the more yellowy golds. And these two are for the background. This is a more lavendery gray for the background, and this I basically took my underpainting. This is my underpainting color, this orange, and I added some white to it. So these grays are going to be for the negative space for now. They're probably too light. I may get them on there and they won't feel colorful enough. We'll see. I'm using a number 2 round brush. It's what I did my underpainting with, and I usually just kind of start with it. It feels big enough that I can stay loose, even with a brush this small on a canvas this small. If I was using a bigger canvas, I would push myself to move up to a bigger paintbrush at this point.
Is that like a nylon-y or a bristly?
Yeah, it is Taclon. It's synthetic. Do I have one that's more clean? Here's one that's cleaner. Brand is Connoisseur. It's a pretty cheap brand. I buy these. They're about $5 a piece, and I use them for a month, and then I replace them. They're white when they're new.
Yeah. Okay. You prefer that to the hog's hair bristle?
I like bristle too, but I kind of go through phases. I'll go through phases with bristle where it'll be all I'll use, especially for portrait.
Oh, okay.
And then I will stop, and it'll take me a while to get back into it again. And then I'll get back into it and I'll go, why did I ever stop using bristle? I love it. And then I'll just stop again at some point. So the important thing for me with these Christmas ornaments is to really not get into rendering little details. But instead, I'm rendering value notes and color notes. So it ends up being really me just sort of dabbing on little spots. And I say this all the time. You do the palette knife mixing, and then you come in with your paintbrush and kind of mix everything into each other. But you lay out the framework for the colors that you're going to have in your painting going forward by doing that pre-mixing. Whether you end up using those colors or not, you're making a plan. I mean, whether you end up using them exactly the way you mixed them, they get changed. Generally, I find everything starts to change when you start to paint. So there's a little ornament here. And there's a darker one here. And if you're having trouble seeing what's going on somewhere in a painting, I need like a brown. I don't have a tube brown, so I'm going to make one with ultramarine and cad red light.
Oh, they made purple?
No, because cad red light is so orange.
Oh,
So really it's making a brown. If I didn't have dioxazine on this palette, then it would be the purple. It's like on Zorn palette, how we mix the black and the red together and make violet. See?
Yeah, yeah.
Brown. Definitely. But it's a violet brown. What was I saying?
Hmm.
It really ends up being all about squinting. Well, all painting is all about squinting.
Can you tell us something about the brush stroke?
I suppose I can try to. Specifically what? I'm just sort of working my way into this slowly with little dabs of color, I guess you could say. So I'm never afraid to put the brush down. My brush strokes don't tend to just go one way. It's not just like I put the brush down and then move it one way and then put it down and move it one way. You know, my brush pushes against the canvas and it pulls against the canvas and I twist it sometimes and, you know, it can go back and forth a lot. But at this stage, when I feel like I'm and just sort of working my way into the painting and beginning, things tend to stay pretty tentative. So I'm really just touching the canvas, but I have enough paint on my paintbrush. I'm making sure that the brushstroke is doing, you know, what it's supposed to be doing, which is picking up a good amount of paint from the palette, moving it to the canvas, and then offloading it onto the canvas in an efficient way.
Are you picking up any of the paint from the initial layer?
I don't believe so. My underpainting
Wow.
is sunk in at this point. Even just that short amount of time with mixing, it is sunk in. Now I could something came up. I could dip my rag in Gamsol right now and probably wipe most of this off.
Yeah.
But for just contact like that, it's fine.
Yeah.
But if I had a bunch of like wet, soppy wet paint on my paintbrush and it was very like loose and washy,
Yeah.
it might be picking it up. So thick paint will stick very nicely to thin paint. That's why the underpainting stays so thin and it'll just sit there underneath it. I don't have, you know, a method that I always stick to. I don't paint from dark to light. I don't paint from background to foreground. I don't think about things in those terms. I just kind of start where I want to start. If I have what I like to call vulnerable colors going on, I will start with those. Like if I'm painting a bunch of lemons on a purple background, I'll paint the yellow parts of the lemons first, because if I don't, then I'm pretty sure if I put the purples in first and then come in and try to paint my yellows, I can be pretty sure those yellows are going to get all messy and yucked up with the purple and lose their freshness. So I put the yellow on first and then I would put the purple on. And that would dictate where I would start that painting. This one, I guess I'm starting where I'm starting because I want to, it's more about like, where are my darkest darks? Where are my lightest lights kind of thing. And so I'm starting in my darkest darks, and that'll help me kind of key the rest of the painting to this section. And nothing ends up being done until everything is done. So I did not finish this, not even close. But I'm going to move on because I can't really know if what I did there is right and is working until I come over here and do some of this. And so some of my paint is kind of transparent. You can still see the underpainting through it, and that's not ideal. I don't like that. I definitely discourage transparent painting. But it's
Why is that?
Why? Because it just doesn't feel like we're taking full advantage of the materials of oil paint. I feel like transparent painting is an acrylic painting technique or a watercolor painting technique. It's not an oil painting technique for alla prima. And so if we're going to be doing alla prima oil painting, we should take advantage of the strengths of the medium and not have canvas showing through, not be modulating the value of what we're painting with that canvas, with that white of the canvas.
Yeah, that makes
We
sense.
should be choosing paint that's the right value and color for the area that we want to be painting it. It should be opaque, and we should be putting it on the way that we intend it to look. And I'm telling myself that, thank you very much right now, and I'm going to do that. You know, I can lighten this paint. I don't have to make it thinner so that it'll feel lighter. I can just lighten the paint. Whether I'm going to lighten it with some white or some pink or some yellow depends on what colors I'm observing, but I don't need to ever use the white of the canvas to do that, or the underpainting, or thinner paint layers. I don't ever want to be doing that. If I want to do that, I might as well go start watercoloring. And then I'm going to need online lessons. Big time. I use a lot of paint straight from the, I do tend to use a lot more paints straight from the tube because there's so much darkness and richness in these ornaments. And so it's such a fun opportunity for me to actually use paint straight from the tube because I when I'm painting real objects realistically, I almost never do. It's too overpowering. The colors are too discordant, and so, but like those accents I just put on, that was straight dioxazine purple, and that's a lot of fun for me to be able to do that. I like that. Woo! But I also need to kind of keep in mind that I need to save the real rich, bright light things for the highlights. So the highlights on these Christmas ornaments, they are not white. They're still very colorful. Like the highlight on this purple ornament is not very light. It's not very light of a value, actually. It feels much lighter than the surrounding stuff. but there's a lot of color in it. And if I can do that with one tube color plus white, it'll be the strongest, it'll be the most saturated light. The more steps you take a paint color away from the tube, the more dull it gets. So even if that highlight doesn't feel like dioxazine purple plus white, even if it feels like something else, I'm going to try to make it work with just dioxazine purple plus white, because if I add another color into the mix there, it'll get even less powerful. And I want that highlight to keep all the power that it can. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like if I add a third color into that, it'll weaken it. Now I can kind of put a little bit around the edge maybe and affect some optical blending type scenario there. But if I try to lighten it more and I pack in more white, yeah, maybe I'm part of it. That did work. Okay, that's probably enough of that for now. Gives me a pretty good start on the purple pie. And maybe I'll kind of test my negative space color a little bit and see if it's working. I have a lot of lost edge in between this area of the gold ornament and the ground, and I put that down and that just feels very purple. It's too vivid. So, you know, half the battle is, it's hard to know when you pre-mix these colors on the palette what's going to work and what's not, especially as you're mixing on this palette that is white and then you're putting it on a canvas that's toned orange if you do things my way. And that tends to make colors feel a little off, or different, at least different than you expected them to. So that's a little better. I just put some more orangish stuff in there and that toned down the purple. And that's working now. I have this lost edge here. When two areas come up against each other that are the same value, but different colors, you can have a lost edge when you don't see a line, and I definitely don't see a line here. But the viewer believes you that if the ornament comes around, more green, the ornament comes around the bottom here like this, and it hits this and you don't see the line anymore, and then it comes, I don't know, what color is that? I'm screwing around, too dark. If you're going to jump around wildly like I'm currently doing from one object to another, you got to keep cleaning your brush if you're going to keep using the same brush, or you could switch brushes, but that messes with my flow, so I tend to not switch brushes very often. And so I wipe my brush off a lot. And you got to remember to keep cleaning it. Keep cleaning your brush in the Gamsol. Everything needs to move over. Drawing problems all around. All right, so back to the lost edge. So I have this lost edge here, and the great thing about it, the fun thing about it is having things like that in our paintings makes them more fun for the viewer to look at, because it gives the brain a puzzle to figure out. Our viewer doesn't want everything all super spelled out for them. We like to connect the dots. And so if I've got an edge of ornament here, maybe with its cast shadow, and an edge of ornament here with the cast shadow from this guy. It's pretty purple. The viewer will then believe you that it continues around the rest of the way there. And they kind of like figuring that out. The brain. People have a lot of trouble deciding what color to paint cast shadows, especially in those grays. It can be really hard just by observation to decide what color things are. I say, if you can't tell what color it is, it's just like those grays I was talking about before for this negative space. Just match the value and then make a decision. And you can make your decision about what color to make a cast shadow based on the colors that are around it. So what color is the thing that's casting that shadow? What color is it being cast on? Start with those piles on your palette and go from there, and then just match the value. Warmer colors feel darker to our eye, so as that shadow slides under the object and it gets darker and darker, think about warming it up a little bit. Adding a little alizarin crimson to it is usually my go-to. And pay attention to the edges. Cast shadows have edges just like objects do, and we can get a lot of information about them from observation. So observe when the cast shadow is meeting the rest of the background. As it gets closer to the object, the shadow is going to get darker and the edges often get more defined. So this cast shadow, as it comes out toward the rest of the background here, there's like almost a double edge of the shadow, but I don't tend to paint those when I see them. I just would make it more blurry over here. This cast shadow is getting a lot of color influence from the ornament. Maybe not as much as I'm gonna paint, but it's definitely getting some pink from the ornament. See how adding that pink makes it feel darker. But in order to give your cast shadows edges, you have to paint back and forth between the cast shadow and the ground. So I'm going to paint some on this shadow, and it gets really warm when it comes right here into this little crack. We darken that by just adding some more quinacridone rose. That's a piece of the ornament. Positive and negative shapes for me, I kind of have to paint them all at once. Everything really influences each other. And I almost can't make observations about one part without having to take the rest into account. And now, so the background, the ground plane, I'm going to do that edge of this cast shadow. And I'm going to work back and forth. keep going back to the palette and getting more. Color's not as important as value right now. I can tweak the color a lot later. If I decide I want to do that. Okay, and so then back to the cast shadow. I try not to do this by dragging the paint that I already put on the canvas around. I try to do it by going back to the palette and getting more paint to use on this. You can make changes by blending on the canvas, but only to a certain point. And then you won't be able to do that anymore. And you'll start blending things in a way that you don't want to be doing. Okay, so now I'm working back into the negative space. Such a major benefit of pre-mixing color for these kinds of areas is that you can work back and forth like this without having to reinvent the wheel every time. The color is there, it's made, you already made it, so you can go back and grab it and use it. It's too light. Because you made enough of it to do that with. The edge of that cast shadow gets a lot crisper the closer it gets to the ornament. And then out here, it's much more fuzzy. I love drawing the positive shapes by filling in the negative space. So I love defining what's going on with the edge of this purple ornament by coming in and painting the background. Ah! Because I just think it gives it kind of a cool cutout kind of look. So with a clean brush, cleanish, there's no real new paint on it. I can blend this a little. If I decide that I want to blur this edge a little bit more, but I really do very little of this manipulating of the paint that's already on the canvas, because I don't like to pick up too much. That's pretty good. This, I think, comes out too far. It's a drawing thing. And it's very saturated color-wise. I don't know, that might end up being too purple in the future. Maybe not, we'll see. I don't ever call anything, you know, totally finished until it is totally finished, because I don't know, I may paint the rest of this stuff over here and this then may end up working, or I may, you know, fill in this ornament and I may decide that this was right after all, but I can't really judge whether this is too purple until some of this other stuff is done. Ah. So paint from the general to the specific. You really want to just be looking at the general value, the shapes of the value areas. And so I look pretty quickly. I'll just kind of glance over there and say, what's that biggest thing going on there? Put it in. And then as I continue to work, get more and more detailed. And sometimes it's not just about adding white to something. With these ornaments, often there's actually a color shift as well. It's not just adding white to it. It's adding a little yellow. Yeah, I'm always trying to figure out how little I can get away with these. And so it's like, how is that all it needs? Is that all it needs? Is that? So I keep stopping and checking, like, would this be a good time to try putting the highlight on? What do you think? Definitely becomes a hierarchy of highlights. There's the light, there's the highlight from the lamp, and then there are all the other different highlights, the little lights from the other ornaments, and they're going to be different colors.
You told me to be more stretchy. I can't say the word.
Strategic?
Yes, by putting on the highlight.
Yes, I did.
And how do you exactly mean that? I mean, how can you do that?
Yeah, so your thing was you were painting these pomegranates, and then the highlights just didn't look very, they didn't look very crisp. It looked kind of like you put them on with a brush stroke instead of really just popping them on there much more efficiently. I'll show you what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I will put the highlight onto, I'll do it with alizarin, I think. I'll put the highlight onto this ornament here. And I'm going to do it with just alizarin, crimson, and white, I think. And so you probably loaded up your brush pretty well, and then you came to the pomegranate, and it felt like you kind of went, like you did like a brush stroke. And the brush stroke, your painting was pretty small. Maybe the brush was kind of large, and the brush stroke just got, it was shaped. It felt like you didn't control it. And what I try to do instead is, and then you really only get one chance. So if you touch it a whole bunch of times, which it didn't really look like you did, if you touch it a whole bunch of times, though, it gets blended into the area around it. Everything gets lighter as a result. And then, I don't know. So what you really should try to do is get the stuff for your highlight, really like put a goopy gloop of it on the brush, and then come in and just touch the canvas with it once. Or, if you're using a flat brush, you can just dab it with the line instead of trying to like drag a highlight. You can just get a flat brush, load it up if the edge will still hold together, and come in and just touch the canvas to create that mark, rather than trying to use the side of the brush and do this, which gets too fat. Sometimes just a different kind of connection of the brush and the canvas is what does it better, is what is needed. It's not always the same physical action to put the highlight on as some of the other areas. And it's good to learn to pay attention to that and try different things physically. All right, well, I'm kind of petering out here a little bit, I think. Is there anything that you would like me to address before I wrap this up?
I was wondering if you just put a few color notes on how much transition you're going to get in color on your foreground. I believe you said you might go pinker, you might go more yellow.
Yeah. Okay, so when I move into bigger like areas of canvas, I am gonna switch. And so I'm pretty, God, it doesn't feel like a lavender on the palette, but I'm fairly cool on this side of the canvas. A little too cool. And then as it moves toward the right side of the canvas, as it moves toward the light source, it gets lighter and a little more warm. So I have these two gray piles that I mixed up, and I end up sort of mixing them together. And adding some of my underpainting color, actually, some of that warm neutral orange to it. Because I have both piles, I can kind of go back and forth. It's just a few strokes to blend it. The other thing is that these ornaments are going to throw a lot of their own color down onto the ground themselves. There's a lot of light that reflects back onto the ground plane from the ornaments. So I'll show you like this gold one. Do you see how that started to happen though with the shift as it gets closer to the light source?
Yes, I did. I can tell.
Okay.
It's very subtle, but
It's very
gives
subtle.
so much interest in life.
And then over here, it would just be like one stroke to define that. Back here, I would probably cool it off a little bit. I don't know. But that's the general gist of how that would go. I would get a little more nuanced in the brush strokes, perhaps. But so from this gold ornament down onto the ground, I'm going to take some of the stuff that's in the ground area, but I'm going to add some of the gold, some yellow to it, maybe. Because I see right here at the, it's too light. I see right here at the edge of this cast shadow, still not happening, that there is a color influence from the gold ornament on the ground. Not necessarily a value difference, maybe a little lighter, but there's some of the color there. Okay, and so basically on and on like that. Until I get that edge that I like. Now it feels too crispy. Like I would probably end up coming in from the other side and painting that again. But it's these little details like some of the yellow coming down onto the floor plane from that gold ornament that really gives that feeling of the quality of light reflecting off the Christmas balls. Not too much blending.
Sarah, a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Got done. How have you enhanced this from what it really looks like, or changed it?
In my painting or in the
Brighter or shinier or anything, or did you try to paint it largely like you saw it, or both?
Maybe a little more colorful.
Yeah, that would be good, right?
Yeah, maybe a little more colorful, but I haven't really tried to change it
Yeah, that's beautiful.
strategically in any way.
Well, Christmas bulbs are pretty beautiful to begin. They don't need a lot of help.
Yeah. So they're a little more complicated than fruit. There's a lot going on in there, but anyway, I think you can see that that's sort of a start.
Ooh, they look beautiful.
And it's really still totally abstract in there, but there's not a whole lot more. I have to hold it at this angle because it gets too much glare of its head on.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot more detail that I'll come in and add to it. Yeah, there is, but I kind of, especially with these, I sort of work them up together because I'll be working on this one over here and I'll say, oh, well, some of this color is showing up in this one because it's in the reflection, or I'm working over here and I'm like, oh, some of this color is showing up in this one because of the reflection. And so they come up all together a lot more than other subjects that I tend to paint. So yeah, so the ornaments can get away with, as long as they kind of show what they are, they don't have to be super detailed. But everything, really painting anything is like that, as long as you get enough information there for the viewer to connect the dots, everybody's happy. And it's more interesting painting that way. All right, well, I'm sorry I did not get farther in the demo, but there you have it, Christmas ornaments.